The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss, and Alara Vance stepped onto the gleaming white docks of the Celestine Academe for the first time in her life, carrying nothing but a single worn duffel bag over her shoulder, and wearing the plain gray uniform that marked her as a scholarship student. She stood there for a moment and let her eyes adjust to the brilliant light that poured through the massive crystal windows, light from 3 different suns that bathed everything in shades of gold and purple and soft blue, and she thought to herself that she had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying in all her 19 years. The Celestine Academe was the most prestigious institution in the entire Galactic Concord, a place where the children of ambassadors and admirals and ancient noble bloodlines came to train and study and prepare themselves to become the future leaders of a civilization that spanned 10,000 worlds. And Alara knew that she did not belong here, really, not in the way the others did. A registration clerk sat behind a curved desk made of something that looked like frozen starlight. And as Alara approached, she saw that the clerk was a Valorian, a tall, graceful being with 4 slender arms, and scales that shimmered with iridescent colors that shifted whenever she moved. And the Valorian barely glanced at the identification chip that Alara handed over. "Human," the clerk said in a flat voice that carried no warmth or interest. "Outer colony origin, provisional admission status, scholarship tier 7. The clerk's 4 hands moved across the console with practiced efficiency, and within moments a small device was pressed into Alara's palm. A room assignment and class schedule and meal privileges all contained in one tiny chip. And then the Valorian was already looking past her to the next student in line, a young Dominari male with silver skin and eyes like molten gold, who was clearly someone of importance. Alara walked away without complaint, and made her way through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past students of dozens of different species who all turned to look at her, with expressions that ranged from curiosity to contempt to something that might have been pity. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Concord 12 years ago, which made her people the newest members of an alliance that had existed for 6,000 years, and she had heard all the words they used to describe her kind, words like primitive and emotional and short-lived and dangerous, words like Deathworlder, which referred to the fact that Earth was considered a hostile environment by galactic standards, a planet of extreme weather and predators and diseases that had somehow produced a species stubborn enough to survive it all. She found her dormitory on the lowest level of the student housing complex, a small room with bare walls and 2 narrow beds and a window that looked out onto nothing but the gray metal hull of a maintenance structure. And when she entered, she found her roommate already there, a Kethri female with pale blue skin covered in bioluminescent markings that pulsed softly with her heartbeat. The Kethri looked up from the personal items she was arranging on her side of the room, and Alara saw disappointment flash across her delicate features before it was quickly hidden behind a mask of polite neutrality. "I am Soraya of the Kethri Third Flowering," the alien girl said in a voice that was musical but cool. "I suppose you are the human they have assigned to share my quarters." "Alara Vance," Alara replied, and she set her bag down on the empty bed, and did not offer her hand, because she had learned that many species found human touch customs strange or even offensive. "It is nice to meet you, Soraya." Soraya made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement and returned to her unpacking, and Alara understood that would need to earn any friendship here, that nothing would be given freely to a human girl from an outer colony that most of the galaxy had never heard of. The days that followed fell into a pattern that Alara found almost comfortable in its predictability, and she attended her classes and sat in the back rows and listened to lectures on subjects that ranged from interstellar law to xenobiology to the complex mathematics of faster-than-light navigation. And she answered questions only when the instructors called upon her directly. She always answered correctly, and the instructors would pause and look at her with mild surprise before moving on. And the other students would whisper to each other about how the human must have memorized everything, how she must be working twice as hard as everyone else just to keep up. How it was almost sad, really, the way her kind always tried so desperately to prove themselves. But none of them noticed the things that Alara did not want them to notice. None of them saw the way her eyes moved constantly, tracking every exit and entrance, mapping the layout of every room she entered, calculating distances and angles and lines of sight with the automatic precision of someone who had been trained to always know exactly how to escape. None of them saw her slip away during mealtimes and free periods, disappearing into the older sections of the academy where the restricted archives were kept, sections that were supposed to be off-limits to students, but which somehow never seemed to detect her presence. None of them noticed that she never spoke about her past, never mentioned family or friends or home, never shared stories about her colony the way the other students shared stories about their worlds. And when anyone asked, she would smile and change the subject so smoothly that they never realized she had not actually answered. And none of them, not the Valorian nobles with their ancient pride, Dominari warriors with their predator instincts, not the telepathic Mindari who could read surface thoughts like others read words on a page, not even the Academy's legendary artificial intelligence that was said to know everything that happened within these walls. None of them suspected even for a moment that Alara Vance was not her real name. She had chosen it from a list of common human names, had built an identity around it piece by piece with the help of people she could never mention, and she wore it now like armor, like a mask, like a promise she had made to herself on the worst night of her life, when everything she had known had burned away and left her standing alone in the ashes. At night, she would lie in her narrow bed and listen to Soraya's soft breathing from across the room, and she would stare at the gray ceiling and remind herself why she was here, what she had come to find, what she had sworn to protect. And she would close her eyes and push down the bare memories that tried to surface, memories of fire and darkness and a voice that was not human speaking inside her mind. She was Alara Vance, a scholarship student from an outer colony, unremarkable and unimportant, and that was exactly what she needed to be, for now. 6 weeks passed at the Celestine Academe, and Alara continued to play her role with careful precision, attending classes and completing assignments and keeping her head down while the galaxy's future leaders swirled around her in a constant dance of politics and ambition and ancient rivalries. But cracks were beginning to appear in her carefully constructed mask, small moments where she revealed more than she intended, and she knew that she was running out of time to find what she had come for. The first crack appeared during a combat simulation class taught by a scarred Thornax veteran who had fought in 3 different wars, and who looked at his students like they were soft children who had never known real danger. The simulation pit was a large circular arena, where holographic opponents could be generated to test a student's fighting abilities. And on this particular day, the instructor had decided to demonstrate human weakness by pitting Alara against a Thornax warrior construct, a towering mass of muscle and armored plates that stood nearly 3 meters tall, and had 4 arms ending in claws that could tear through starship hulls. The human will attempt to survive for 30 seconds, the instructor announced to the watching class, and Alara heard laughter from several of the students. This will demonstrate why physical combat roles are best left to species actually designed for warfare. Alara stepped into the pit, and the holographic Thornax charged at her with a roar that shook the walls. And what happened next would be talked about in whispered conversations for weeks afterward. She did not run or cower or freeze in fear the way everyone expected. Instead, she moved, flowing around the Thornax's first strike like water around a stone, and her hands found pressure points that should have been protected by thick armor plating, and in 4 seconds the massive warrior construct was on the ground, disabled, systems completely shut down. The arena fell silent. Alara stood over her fallen opponent and realized her mistake too late. Realized that she had used techniques that no human colony could have taught her. Techniques that combined Dominari close combat strikes with Kethri nerve targeting, and something older, something that came from training she could never explain. "Lucky hit," she said quietly, and she walked out of the pit without looking at anyone. But she could feel their eyes on her back like the heat of a sun. The second crack came in xenolinguistics class when Professor Vethon, a Mindari scholar with 6 eyes and a mind that contained more languages than most civilizations had ever spoken, displayed a fragment of precursor text on the classroom screen. The precursors were the great mystery of the galaxy, an ancient civilization that had existed millions of years ago and had seeded life across countless worlds before vanishing without explanation, leaving behind only ruins and artifacts and fragments of a language that almost no one could read. "This text has never been successfully translated," Professor Vehan said. "Only 12 beings in the entire Concord possess the knowledge to interpret precursor script, and they disagree on even the most basic meanings." Alara looked at the symbols on the screen and felt something stir inside her mind. Felt knowledge that was not her own rise up like a tide. And before she could stop herself, she spoke. "It is a warning," she said, and every head in the classroom turned toward her. "It says that the children must prepare for what follows, that the sleepers will wake when the stars align, that what was lost will be found in the blood of the chosen." Professor Vethon's 6 eyes all focused on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl, and for a long, terrible moment she thought the Mindari would reach into her thoughts and see everything she was. "Where did you learn to read precursor script?" the professor asked, in a voice that had lost all its usual warmth. "I must have read it somewhere," Alara said, and she shrugged and looked away. "Maybe I just guessed." She felt the professor's telepathic touch brush against the outer edges of her mind, felt it recoil as if it had touched something hot, and she knew that Vethon had sensed something strange, but had not been able to see clearly what it was. That night Soraya confronted her in their shared room, and Alara saw that her roommate's bioluminescent markings were pulsing rapidly, a sign of strong emotion among the Kethri. "You wake up screaming at night," Soraya said. "You speak in languages that I have never heard, languages that do not sound human, and your voice changes when you speak them, becomes deeper, older, like something else is talking through you." Alara said nothing, and Soraya continued, her voice growing softer. "Seen the scars on your back when you change clothes, scars that look like they came from claws or ritual blades, scars that tell a story of great pain, and I have watched you disappear for hours into parts of the academy that students are not supposed to access." "Soraya," Alara began, but her roommate held up a hand to stop her. "I am not asking you to tell me everything," Soraya said. "I am asking you to tell me one thing, just one true thing, because I have started to care about you, Alara Vance, if that's even your real name, and I want to understand." Alara looked at this alien girl who had been cold to her at first, but had slowly warmed over the weeks, who had started saving a seat for her in classes, who had defended her once when a Dominari noble had made cruel jokes about human stupidity. "Who are you?" Soraya asked. "Really?" Alara was silent for a long moment, and then she spoke words that were true, even if they revealed almost nothing. "Someone who made a promise a long time ago," she said. "A promise to people who died so that I could live. And I came here to keep that promise, no matter what it costs me." Soraya's markings pulsed, once, twice, and then she nodded slowly. "Then I will help you," she said, "because the Kethri believe that some promises are sacred, and those who make them should not have to keep them alone." Alara felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight and painful for years, and she realized that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer friendship without wanting anything in return. But even as she allowed herself this small moment of warmth, She knew that others were watching her, others who would not be so kind. Across the academy, in a private suite that cost more than most planets earned in a year, Kalen Vor of the Dominari Imperial line sat before a holographic display that showed everything he had learned about the mysterious human girl who could fight like a warrior and read languages that should have been impossible for her to know. "Who are you?" he murmured to himself as he studied her face. "And why do I feel like you are the most dangerous person in this entire academy?" He did not yet have answers, but he was determined to find them, because Kalen Vor was the heir to 6,000 years of Dominari power, and he did not like mysteries that he could not control. The Festival of Unity was the most important celebration in the Galactic Concord calendar, a day when all species came together to remember the founding of their great alliance 6,000 years ago, and at the Celestine Academe, it was tradition for students and faculty to gather in the grand atrium for speeches and performances and a feast that showcased delicacies from 1,000 different worlds. Ilara stood near the back of the crowd with Soraya at her side, watching as dignitaries and nobles moved through the glittering space, their expensive clothing and jewelry catching the light of the massive crystal chandelier that hung from the vaulted ceiling like a frozen waterfall of stars. She had spent the morning in the restricted archives again, searching for something that she could not name, but would recognize when she found it. And she was tired and frustrated, and her instincts were screaming at her that something was wrong. "You look like you expect an attack," Soraya said. Soraya whispered, noticing the way Ilara's eyes kept scanning the room. "I always expect an attack," Ilara replied, and it was meant to be a joke, but neither of them laughed. The first sign that something was wrong came when the lights flickered, once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the grand atrium into absolute darkness, broken only by the soft glow of Soraya's bioluminescent markings. Then the screaming started. Emergency lights came on a moment later, bathing everything in harsh red, and Ilara saw figures in black armor pouring through doors that should have been sealed, armed with weapons that hummed with deadly energy. She recognized the symbol on their chest plates, a clenched fist crushing a spiral of stars. The purest ascendancy. She had heard of them. Extremists who believed that the Galactic Concord had grown weak by admitting what they called lesser species, who wanted to purge the alliance of everyone who did not meet their standards of genetic purity, and at the top of their list of contaminant races to be eliminated was humanity. "Everyone stay calm," shouted a voice that cut through the chaos, and Ilara saw that it belonged to Kalen Vor, who had somehow positioned himself at the front of the crowd, his silver skin gleaming in the red emergency light as he faced the attackers with the calm authority of someone who had been raised to command. "I am Kalen Vor of the Dominari Imperial line, and I demand to speak with whoever is in charge of this assault." One of the armored figures stepped forward and removed his helmet to reveal a face that was also Dominari, aristocratic and cold, with scars that spoke of many battles. "Little Prince," the leader said with a mocking smile, "your family name means nothing here. Not anymore. Not since your foolish ancestors decided to dilute our great civilization with primitives and weaklings." "What do you want?" Kalen asked, and his voice did not waver, even though Ilara could see the tension in his shoulders. "We want what should have happened 12 years ago, when the humans first crawled out of their backwater world," the leader said. "We want the Concord to return to its true purpose, to be ruled by those who are worthy, and we will start by making an example of this academy." More purist soldiers were herding students into the center of the atrium, pushing them with the butts of their weapons, and Ilara felt Soraya grabbed and pulled away from her side. "All non-essential species will be executed," the leader announced, starting with the human. Ilara felt every eye in the room turn toward her, felt the weight of centuries of prejudice and fear pressing down on her. And for a moment, she considered letting them take her, letting them make their example, letting herself disappear the way she had always planned to disappear if her mission failed. But then she saw Soraya struggling in the grip of two soldiers, saw the fear in her friend's eyes, saw the other students, young people from a dozen different worlds, who had done nothing wrong except be born into species that the purists deemed inferior. And something inside her that had been locked away for a very long time finally broke free. The lights went out again, all of them this time, even the emergency systems, and Alara moved. She had been trained by people who did not exist, taught techniques that had been old when the Dominari were still learning to build fire, and she had spent years suppressing those abilities, hiding what she could do, pretending to be ordinary. But she was not ordinary. She was something new, something that the galaxy had never seen before, and in the darkness, she was death itself. The first soldier died without making a sound, his neck twisted at an angle that should have been impossible. And then Alara was moving again, flowing through the crowd of attackers like a shadow, her hands finding weak points in their armor, her body bending and twisting in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics. 17 minutes. That was how long it took her to neutralize 46 armed insurgents, working alone in complete darkness, moving so fast that the purists never even got a clear shot at her. And when she finally reached the leader, she did not kill him. She simply placed her hand against his forehead and whispered something in a language that made his eyes roll back in his head before he collapsed unconscious at her feet. The lights came back on. The grand atrium looked like a battlefield, armored bodies scattered across the floor, weapons lying abandoned where they had fallen. And in the center of it all stood Alara Vance, the human scholarship student, the girl from an outer colony that nobody had ever heard of, her gray uniform torn and splattered with blood that was not her own. Alara woke in a medical bay, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with alien technology, and for a moment she did not know where she was or how she had gotten there. And then the memories came flooding back, and she sat up so fast that alarms started blaring. "Easy," said a familiar voice, and she turned to see Soraya sitting in a chair beside her bed, her bioluminescent markings dim with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with concern. "You have been unconscious for 2 days, and the doctors say you need to rest." 2 days? Alara repeated, and she felt panic rising in her chest. "I cannot stay here. There are people coming, investigators. They will want to know." "They are already here," Soraya said quietly. "Concord Intelligence has sent 3 different teams, and there are journalists from every major news network in the galaxy camped outside the academy, and the council itself has demanded a full report on what happened and how a human scholarship student managed to single-handedly defeat an armed terrorist cell." Alara closed her eyes and let out a long breath, knowing that her carefully constructed cover was destroyed, knowing that everything she had worked for was now in danger. "They are calling you a hero," Soraya continued. "The students you saved have been telling everyone about the girl who moved through darkness like a ghost, who fought like no human has ever fought before, who saved their lives without asking for anything in return." "I am not a hero," Alara said. "I am just someone who did what needed to be done." The door to the medical bay opened, and Kalen Vor walked in, his silver skin catching the light, his golden eyes fixed on Alara with an intensity that made her want to reach for a weapon that was not there. "Leave us," he said to Soraya, and his voice carried the weight of someone who was used to being obeyed. "No," Soraya replied, and she stood up and positioned herself between Kalen and the bed. "Whatever you have to say to her, you can say to both of us." Kalen stared at her for a long moment, and then something that might have been respect flickered across his face before he nodded. "Very well," he said, and he pulled out a small device and projected a holographic display that filled the room with images and documents and star charts. "I have spent the last 2 days using every resource my family possesses to find out who you really are, Alara Vance, and what I discovered has kept me awake at night." Alara looked at the display and felt her heart sink as she recognized classified files that should have been impossible to access. Files that she had hoped would stay buried forever. 12 years ago, when humanity made first contact with the Concorde, there was another event that happened at the same time, Kalen said. An event that was erased from public records and classified at the highest levels of secrecy. He gestured, and the bed display changed to show an image of a massive structure floating in the void between galaxies, a station that was clearly not built by any known species, covered in symbols that Alara recognized all too well. A human deep space exploration vessel encountered this object while traveling through what they thought was empty space. Kalen continued, a precursor station, intact, still functioning after millions of years, and the crew went inside to investigate. Another gesture, and the display showed a crew manifest, faces of men and women who had died in the darkness between stars, and among them, two faces that made Alara's breath catch in her throat. Her parents. The crew was killed, Kalen said, and his voice had softened slightly. All of them except one, a 7-year-old girl, who was found 3 weeks later by a Concorde rescue team, alone on the station, surrounded by the bodies of her family. Soraya made a small sound of horror and reached out to take Alara's hand, and Alara let her, grateful for the warmth of contact. But the girl who came out of that station was not the same girl who went in, Kalen said. The precursors did something to her, changed her, gave her knowledge and abilities that should not exist, made her into something that has never existed before in the history of the galaxy. He looked directly at Alara, and his golden eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and wonder and something that might have been envy. The Dominari have ruled the Concorde for 6,000 years, he said. My ancestors built this civilization on the hope that we would one day be chosen as the inheritors of the precursor legacy, that we would prove ourselves worthy of the knowledge and power that they left behind. He paused, and the weight of his next words seemed to fill the room. But the precursors did not choose us, did they? He said. They chose humanity, a species that we dismissed as primitive and short-lived and unworthy. And they chose you, a child, a girl who watched her parents die and was transformed by ancient machines that have been waiting for millions of years. Alara finally spoke, her voice steady, even though her hands were shaking. They showed me things, she said. They put knowledge inside my mind that I am still trying to understand. And they gave me abilities that I have spent years learning to control. And they told me why. She looked at Kalen, looked at Soraya, looked at the images of her parents that still floated in the holographic display. The precursors did not vanish, she said. They fled. They ran away from something that was coming, something that had already destroyed civilizations older than they were, something that moves between galaxies and consumes everything in its path. What is it? Soraya whispered. I do not know, Alara admitted. They did not have a name for it. Only images, only fear, only the certainty that it would come eventually, and that someone would need to be ready to fight it. She stood up from the bed, ignoring the weakness in her legs, ignoring the protests of the medical machines. That is why I came to Celestine, she said. Not for education, not for the prestige, but because this academy sits on top of the largest collection of precursor artifacts in the galaxy. And somewhere in those artifacts is the information I need, the weapons I need, the knowledge that will let us survive what is coming. Kalen was silent for a long moment, and then he did something that Alara never expected. He knelt. Then let me help you find it, he said, because if what you say is true, then the petty politics of species and status do not matter anymore. Nothing matters except survival. Alara looked down at the Dominari prince who had been raised to believe that his kind were the rightful rulers of the galaxy, who had been taught since birth that humans were beneath him, and she saw something in his eyes that gave her hope. She saw the willingness to change. "Get up," she said, and she offered him her hand. "We have work to do." The news of Elara's true identity spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carried by journalists and diplomats and whispered conversations in the corridors of power. And within a week, the Celestine Academe had become the center of the greatest controversy the Galactic Concord had ever known. Some called her a miracle, a gift from the Ancient Ones, proof that the precursors had not abandoned their children, but had simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal their chosen heir. Others called her an abomination, a human contaminated by alien technology, a threat to the natural order that had governed galactic civilization for 6,000 years. The Concord Council convened an emergency session and voted to demand that Elara be taken into custody for what they called protective study, which everyone understood was simply a polite way of saying that they wanted to lock her away and dissect her secrets for their own benefit. "You cannot let them take her," Soraya argued during a tense meeting in Kalen's private quarters, her markings flashing with anger. "She saved hundreds of lives. She is the only one who knows what is coming, and they want to treat her like a laboratory specimen." "My family has already ordered me to distance myself from this situation," Kalen replied, and his voice was bitter. "They say that associating with the human anomaly will damage our political standing, that I am risking 6,000 years of Dominari influence for the sake of one girl." "And what did you tell them?" Elara asked quietly. Kalen smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had ever seen on his face. "I told them that some things are more important than politics," he said. "And then I told them that if they disagreed, they could find another heir." Elara felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope, and she knew that whatever happened next, she would not be facing it alone. Alone. The three of them made their way to the deepest level of the Academy, to a sealed vault that had remained locked for 6,000 years, ever since the first Concord explorers had discovered it, buried beneath the surface of the world, that would eventually become the site of the Celestine Academe. Guards tried to stop them, but Kalen's royal authority still carried weight, and Soraya's family connections opened doors that would have remained closed to others. And finally they stood before a massive circular door, covered in precursor symbols, that pulsed with a soft inner light. "The Council will know we are here," Soraya said. "They will send soldiers." "Then we need to move quickly," Elara replied, and she stepped forward and placed her hand against the door. The symbols flared brilliant white, and the door began to open, massive mechanisms grinding into motion for the first time in millennia. And beyond lay a chamber that took their breath away, was filled with technology that made even the most advanced Concord systems look like children's toys. Machines and displays and devices whose purpose Elara understood instinctively, even though she had never seen anything like them before. And at the center of it all stood a pedestal with a single crystalline object resting on top. "The beacon," Elara whispered, and memories that were not her own flooded through her mind. Memories of the beings who had built this place, who had hidden their greatest treasures here, and left them waiting for the one who would come to claim them. She walked toward the pedestal, and heard shouts from behind her, heard boots pounding on metal floors, heard someone yelling for her to stop and surrender. But none of it mattered, because she was so close now, so close to fulfilling the promise she had made all those years ago. Her hand closed around the crystal, and light exploded outward, filling the chamber, filling the academy, filling the sky. Above the planet, visible from orbit, visible from neighboring star systems, a signal that raced outward at speeds that should have been impossible. And then the displays came alive. Star maps projected themselves into the air, not just of this galaxy, but of others, dozens of galaxies, hundreds of star systems, showing the locations of hidden installations and weapon caches and sanctuary worlds that the precursors had prepared for the day when their successors would need them. The soldiers who had been rushing to arrest Alara stopped and stared in stunned silence as the full scope of what she had unlocked became clear. "This is the inheritance," Alara said, and her voice carried through the chamber with a resonance that seemed to come from somewhere beyond herself. "This is what the precursors left for us. The tools we need to survive, the knowledge we need to fight." She turned to face the crowd that had gathered, soldiers and students and faculty, representatives of the Concord Council who had arrived to witness either her capture or something far greater. "You spent 6,000 years trying to prove you were worthy of this legacy," she said. "You built your civilization on the hope that someday you would be chosen, that someday you would be trusted with the power to save the galaxy." She lifted her chin and met their eyes without fear, without apology, without any doubt about what she was or what she represented. "Humanity did not ask for this burden," she said. "We did not seek it, or scheme for it, or fight wars to claim it. It was given to us by beings who looked at every species in this galaxy and decided that we, the newcomers, the primitives, the emotional, short-lived Deathworlders from a backwater planet, we were the ones they trusted most." She paused and let her words sink in. "Maybe they were wrong," she continued. "Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe humanity will fail, and everything they built will be destroyed. But I do not think so. I think they saw something in us that you have been too proud to see, something that makes us worthy, not because we are the strongest or the oldest or the most advanced, but because we never give up. We never abandon those who need us. We never stop fighting for the people we love." She stepped down from the pedestal and walked toward Kalen and Soraya, who stood together watching her with expressions of awe and pride. "The threat the precursors warned me about is still coming," she said. "It may be years away, or it may be decades, but it will come, and when it does, the galaxy will need to be ready." She reached out and took the hands of her friends, one human and one alien and one prince, who had learned that true nobility was not about blood, but about choice. "Humanity will lead that fight," she said, "not because we think we are better than anyone else, but because we were asked to, and we keep our promises." Chamber was silent, and then Kalen Vor, heir to the Dominari Imperial line, dropped to one knee, and behind him other students did the same, and then soldiers, and then even the council representatives, until everyone in the room was kneeling before the human girl who had been transformed by ancient machines and given the responsibility of saving everything. "We are with you," Kalen said, "whatever comes." Alara looked at them all, looked at the star maps still glowing in the air around her, looked at the future that stretched out before her full of danger and uncertainty and the weight of impossible expectations, and she smiled. Because she was not alone anymore. Because humanity was not alone anymore. Because the galaxy that had dismissed her species as primitives had finally learned the truth. That sometimes the most extraordinary heroes come from the most ordinary places. And that a fresh face at the academy could change everything.